Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. With schools across the country reopening, we ask a critical question today. How prepared is the Indian educational system for children who haven't been in classrooms for almost 2 years? And depending upon that state of preparedness or lack of preparedness is the future of an entire generation of Indians. Joining me now to discuss this critical issue is someone who's devoted a lot of time and thought to this particular question. He's the CEO of the Azim Premji Foundation and the Vice-Chancellor of the Azim Premji University, Anurag Behar. Dr. Behar, now that the Omicron wave has almost completely subsided, schools are opening physically across the country. However, they face a major problem. Millions of children will be returning who have not been in classrooms for almost 2 years. In addition, many or most of these children will probably have forgotten what they were taught 2 years ago. Before we discuss what needs to be done to tackle this problem, can you begin by explaining how serious a problem is this?
Thank you, Karan. Thank you for inviting me again to your show. And even more than that, thank you for picking up this matter. I mean, in today's world where there's so much happening, this, which I think is perhaps one of the most urgent crises that's facing us, is not much being talked about. So thank you for that, Karan. I think we can look at it very simply, which is that we have roughly 250 million school-age children, and that's about 25 crores. And let's say about a crore, a couple of crores, or 3 crores of them come from the kind of families, backgrounds, where there is a lot of parental support for learning, basically from upper middle class, upper class homes. But if you take the other 22, 21, 20 crores, whatever that number be, whichever number you pick, 23, 22, 21 crores, it's a massive number. So what's happened with these kids, the vast majority of our school-going children, is exactly what you said, that the last time that they've gone to school on a regular basis is March 2020. They haven't been to school for 2 years. And therefore, they've learned pretty much nothing over the past 2 years. Online education doesn't work. First of all, they don't have access to it. Second, online education as it is does not work for children. So that's not been effective. And then other efforts such as, and various state governments, various teachers tried very good things. They tried, while the schools were closed, they tried to reach out to children in their mohallas, in their neighborhoods, try to teach them there. But none of that can compensate for going to school 6 days a week. So the end result is they've lost pretty much what they should have learned over the past 2 years. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned in your question, which is not only have they lost 2 years of what they should have learned, but something which is very natural has also happened, which is what they knew in March 2020, a lot of that they've forgotten. So you have a situation where the vast majority of India's children, an entire generation or a generation and a half, because we're talking about 12 years, has lost over 2 years of schooling, over 2 years of learning. And then can we think of a crisis which is bigger than this, which has ever been faced by Indian education? At least I can't think of one.
In fact, I believe the problem you're describing is perhaps compounded by one further development. Many of these children, when they go back after a 2-year gap from classrooms, will go back either with a promotion or what is perhaps even a double promotion. To give you an example, a child who was in grade 3 when the pandemic shut down schools never went to grade 4, but will now go back to grade 5. To what extent does this make an already very serious problem much worse?
Karan, that's a very interesting phrase. I never thought of it like that at all. Double promotion or promotion, as you mentioned it. The only editing that I would do to your question is, it's not that many of them are getting this. It's every child. So every child, so let's take any child in class 6th today. That child has gone regularly to school only in class 4th, towards the end of class 4th. And in a couple of months, she or he will go into class 7. So your question is very to the point, but it's not some children, it's every child. And which really is this whole matter that I was talking about, that children lost 2 years of learning. And of course, they've forgotten a lot more than that.
But in fact, Dr. Behar, I'll underline this for the audience. There's a real crisis here because kids whose actual educational level is no more than grade 3, and that's assuming they remember what they were taught in grade 3. As you pointed out, there's a great likelihood they've forgotten what they were taught, will now go back to grade 5, and very soon they will be going to grade 6. And so they will be utterly unprepared for what they are being taught. They probably won't even be able to follow what concepts are being given to them. So this is a real crisis in the making here.
Any word that you use seems too mild, Karan. Crisis, emergency, anything seems too mild. I mean, because you've put it in a most comprehensive, succinct manner, that you are in class 7. And if somebody is trying to teach you, your teacher is trying to teach you class 7, the reality is you have not gone to class 6, you've not gone to class 5, you perhaps have forgotten a lot of what you knew in class 4. So how can you go on? It is, at its core, Karan, it's a very simple thing. It doesn't require, much insight, much thinking. If kids don't go to school for 2 years, they haven't learned what they should have learned, and they would have forgotten a lot. So you got to start from where they are. You can't start from where you thought they should be.
Absolutely. It's a very simple problem, but it's also a very devastating problem. And you explained it very fully. So I think the audience will understand just how damaging this could be if not properly tackled. Now, before I come to talking about how it should be tackled, let me ask you, whose responsibility is it to find a strategy for tackling this problem? Is it the responsibility of state governments because constitutionally education comes at the state government level? Or is it the primary responsibility of schools because they are at the cutting edge of facing the problem?
It is it's squarely a responsibility of the states, Karan. Squarely a responsibility of the states. Like you said, state governments run the schools, and therefore the strategy, the approach has to be determined by each state. The implementation of it, of course, has to be enabled, supported by the state. Eventually, the implementation will happen at the school level. But there is no doubt states have to tackle this. The strategy, the approach, the resources have to come from the states.
Now, I don't want to talk about individual states. That would be invidious. And I imagine for you, because you work very closely with them on this issue, it would be also difficult to speak about specific states. But let me ask this in a more general sense. Are there states that have made an adequate and effective attempt to try and forge a strategy and therefore are relatively better prepared for handling the problem? And equally, are there other states which simply haven't woken up to the crisis that looms on the horizon and are utterly unprepared? Or do you feel practically all states are somewhere in the middle, aware of the problem, but they don't have a strategy for handling it?
Karan, there's a wide variation across our states. There is a bunch of states which is thinking of it very carefully. They're strategizing very appropriately. The implementation is yet to happen. And then there are a certain set of states which are trying, but at least in my assessment, are not trying enough even to think through the approach. And then there is a certain set of states which will mouth the very same things. There is nobody who can deny the reality of this massive learning loss, the crisis that we are facing. So even they don't deny it, but from a perspective of actually thinking it through, they're not doing it. I must also add that I have seen a lot of progress on this matter over the past 6 months. So 6 months ago, if you'd asked me the same question, I was actually a very frustrated person. It seemed just mind-boggling to me that when this is a kind of crisis that is facing the country, facing pretty much every child, why is it that the states were not taking up just this matter of thinking it through? But I've seen a lot of progress in the past 6 months, and that's why you have at least a few states which are thinking very systematically. One One has to implement that systematic thinking, but that's a great start.
I noticed the three categories of states that you've created. The best category are states that are thinking it through, but haven't implemented their thinking. The problem is schools have already opened. That implementation of thinking should have happened before schools opened. Now, you have states who devoted thought but not implemented it, but at the same time, you have children who are back in classrooms, and the strategy that should have been implemented before they arrived in the classroom is still not implemented. So what happens to those poor children sitting in classrooms today?
Yeah, Karan, that's a problem. That's a problem. And then I wish the thinking had happened 9 months ago and the implementation had started 4 months ago. I wish that were the case, but that's not really the case. But we are where we are. So at least from here on, the states that are thinking it through, I think they will do a good job. I must also say that this
Can I interrupt?
implementing.
Can I interrupt?
Karan, just one.
I just say this. When you say they'll do a good job, that's on the assumption that they will implement their thinking quickly, something you said they haven't done as yet.
Correct. That's correct. And I say that with some degree of confidence, because as you mentioned, Karan, that we work very closely with some states or very many states. So I'm seeing this on the ground as to what they're thinking, what they're trying to do. I just wanted to mention that this matter of implementing and not implementing, it's not a 0 or 1, right? Which is this, let's take the states that are thinking very well about it and doing, I think, the right things. It's not as though they've held back the implementation for everything to fall into place. They've started some bit of the implementation earlier. Like I said, it's not perfect. I wish they had done it 5 months ago, but they've at least started.
Tell me this, what is it that they need to do? What are the components of the strategy that states should come up with? And the reason I'm asking you is you worked very closely with them. You've been advising them. They've been consulting you. So I take it you have in your mind a fairly clear idea of the steps that should make up this strategy. Can you, in simple terms, explain to the audience what is it that should be done? What is it that should be implemented?
Yeah, sure. You see, the thing is that conceptually, and let's take these two things one by one. Conceptually, the matter is very simple. Conceptually, it's the implementation of the stuff, getting things done on the ground, that's very hard. Now, why is it conceptually very simple? Here's why it's conceptually very simple. Let's go back to the same class that you and I were talking about, the class 6th, where you have, let's say, 25 kids in class 6th. And because they've not been to school for the past 2 years, a very large number of them are at the level of class 4. Some of them have forgotten, so they're at class 3. Some forgotten more, class 2. So when this teacher goes into the class with 25 kids, the moment you recognize that it's not a class full of kids who are at grade 7 level learning, but they're at grade 4, grade 3, grade 2. That's class 4, class 3, class 2. Once you do that, conceptually it becomes simple, because what you all need to do is you need to start teaching the kids who are in class 4 from class 4 onwards, those who are in class 3 kind of learning level, class 3 onwards, and so on. So conceptually, it's simple. Now, what do you need to do? What all do you need to make this happen? First of all, you need a recognition. You need let's call it a direction and instruction, which says, look, this is very important, this particular matter. A direction from the state government that we will focus on recovering lost learning. We will not focus on completing the syllabus for class 6th. If the state government directions are focus on completing class 6 syllabus, that's what they will do. But if the state government's instructions are forget about class 6 syllabus in our hypothetical example, but focus on recovering lost learning. So the first point is a clear instruction. Second, then the teacher needs to have the tool to actually go into that classroom and assess what level are the kids on. It's a fairly simple assessment tool, which very many teachers already have. Most can get, and they of course know how to use it. All they're doing is assessing children what learning level they are at, 2, 3, 4. That's what they do. Now, once they've done that, now this is a detail, but it's a critical detail, right? Which is once the teacher has assessed which kid is in class 2 level, or which kids are in class 2 and class 3 and class 4 level, group them accordingly, and then teach them accordingly. And for teaching them accordingly, then you need material. When I say material, you need perhaps appropriate workbook, which needs to be developed. You need perhaps an instruction which says, okay, you're in class 6. However, these kids are in class 3. Therefore, use these chapters in the class 3 textbooks, which, by the way, you don't have normally because you're in class 6, but we'll make sure you have it now, right? So you get an instruction saying recover lost learning. You go in and assess the kids as to where do they stand. And then you put them in appropriate groups. And then you use the learning material, textbooks and other material, which is at the right level, right? Now, Karan, one very critical thing I've not finished with. So therefore, conceptually, it's very simple. But all this needs preparation. All this needs the teacher to have the assessment tools, the teacher to have appropriate learning material, because a class 6, class 7 teacher will not have the learning material for class 2, 3, 4, right? Most importantly, alongside the instruction of saying recover lost learning, don't worry about the current year syllabus, what it needs is time. And Karan, I cannot emphasize that enough. If you were to say that recover this lost learning in a month, it's not going to happen. You need time.
Let me now ask you a couple of questions because they arise straight out of what you said. You're saying that even though we're talking about class 6 as an example, it will comprise some kids who are no higher than class 2 level, some at class 3, some at class 4, some at class 5. And they should be all organized into groups while still being nominally kept in class 6. Now, the question is this: it only makes sense that they should be organized into groups but still retained normally at class 6 level if they can very quickly be taken up to class 6 levels. Otherwise, if it's going to take 3 years for them to catch up, because ordinarily if they'd gone through school in a proper way, it would have taken 3 years, then is it not better to send them straight back to class 3 rather than keep them at class 6, which is a facade, when actually they're not? So that's the first question, because it only makes sense to keep them in groups at the class 6 level if the catching up can happen pretty quickly. And if it can't, then is it not safer and better to send them straight back to 2 and say, I'm sorry, you've lost 3 years, but that is how it has to be?
So you could do pretty much anything like that, but let's recognize that this language that we are using, you and I, class, right? I think we should, in this current situation, we should dispense with the language of class. Really, there are no classes. When kids in so-called class 6 are across class 2, class 3, class 4, class 5, it's pretty much what you're saying, which is that class is just a misnomer. We should not use it. Now, therefore, there's another step that needs to be taken.
Okay, let me stop you there, because I think it's important. Let me stop you on that point about class. Look, grading children by class or grade is essential to every school in every country. If you're now saying it's meaningless and you can afford in one class to have children who actually should be in 4 different classes, then you're doing a great injustice to those kids who are genuinely at class 6 level because their peers are at class 2. But you're equally doing an injustice to kids who are at 2 class level or 2 grade level, but are alongside people at 5 and 6. One lot or both lots will get complexes, which is why I'm saying I'm not denying the need to bring them up to the level they should be at. But should you do it with all of them in the same class? The only reason to keep them all in the same class is because you don't want them to feel suddenly, compared to their age, they've been demoted. But it may be more honest to demote them and accept they've lost 2 years and help them properly catch up, rather than keep this fiction that you're actually in class 6, but you're no better than class 2. That's the question.
Yeah, so 3 things, Karan. So the first thing is that actually, in reality, forget about the pandemic, right? In reality, if you take 3 years ago, in any class, you will always have a situation where children are at multiple levels. And unfortunately, given the quality of our learning and in schools, typically in any class 6, not today, but before the pandemic, you'll have kids which are, some are at 6th grade level, some are at 5, some are at late 4 and stuff like that. That is always the case, right? Okay. So teachers should be teaching at multiple levels. This is not the phenomena in itself is not unknown, unusual. is the size, which means how many children are across those levels. That is what is unusual. That's one. Second is actually you gave the answer to your own question, which is you're making choices, right? Which is a better choice? Do you keep these kids in a cohort which is their age group, which has its own social implications? Also, the implications of different children learn at different speeds. There's no point in putting a child who's at, let's say, grade 4, but actually is in grade class 6, putting him back into 4 because this child perhaps can learn in 6 months' time, right? So you're making choices, and we are becoming very technical here, but you're making choices. There's never a perfect solution.
Okay.
In my view, keeping them in the same class because children will learn at different speeds is perhaps a better alternative. Lastly, and this, Karan, hold on. This is a very important thing, which is what I wanted to say earlier. You see, when we are talking about recovering lost learning, and we're talking about, in this particular example, grade 4, 5, 6, or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, one of the other critical steps that we should be taking, and many states have done that, the states that I was, let's say, lauding, they have done that, is that we actually need to reconfigure our curriculum. Our curriculum is famously overloaded with content, right? So you do not need that kind of highly loaded, content-heavy curriculum to achieve the learning that should be there for class 6. So one of the important elements in the approach or the strategy to solve this matter is you need to very carefully look at what is the curriculum and cut it down to a level where you're not compromising on the learning objectives, but you're not as unnecessarily loading on content. Right? I can give you a couple of examples.
No, I want to still go back to some of the things you said earlier, and then I'll come back to curriculum, because curriculum is very important. Sure. But there's still one point from what you said earlier. You said the focus should be on catching up, not actually advancing from grade 6 to 7. In which case, that 1 year will still be lost, because the focus in grade 6 will not be teaching them to send them to grade 7. It will be helping them catch up from whether they're at 4 or 5 or whatever. So there's still a year that's lost. That's inherent in what you're saying, isn't it?
So, so let's just take this particular year then. And that's why what I was calling the refurbished or the redesigned curriculum is important. Once you have the redesigned curriculum, and you're right, what you're saying is that in this particular year, let's say this 1 year, not only do you have to catch up for 2 years or 2.5 years, but you also have to do this particular year. So we're talking about, let's say 3 years in 1 year, right? Now, first, therefore, that refurbished curriculum is very critical, very, very important. Second is that refurbished curriculum will have to continue for the next few years. It's not as though this is 1 year. So you're not catching up everything in this 1 year. So if you imagine this cohort of children will continue with this refurbished curriculum without compromising on learning, without compromise. It's a good thing to do. Without compromising on learning, they will actually continue to catch up over the next couple of years. Right?
I understand
lastly,
that.
Lastly, as I mentioned, children will recover at different speeds. Some kids will recover in 6 months' time. Some kids might take 1.5 years' time. Some kids might recover in 9 months' time. We don't know this. We don't know because there will be a wide variation, and we have to be prepared for that. And that preparation has to be that while there's intense focus on recovering lost learning in this coming year, we cannot let go of the notion or let go of the priority of recovering lost learning even the next year.
But the whole thing hinges on the new curriculum, which is scaled down, which only teaches children the essentials, not the overload that you're talking about. But curriculums need to be created, and certainly politicians can't do it. They don't have the skills to do it. Committees of academics have to step in and create the curriculum. Has anyone started that process? Are there states where committees have been appointed to expeditiously, and it can't be done over a period of years, it has to be done expeditiously because those schools have already begun functioning. So is anyone working on a new curriculum? By now, by the way, they should have created it and it should be taught. So where are we at the curriculum stage?
So the first thing is that the reason I was so glad with some of the states is that they've done it, right? So they've done it. So That's a good thing. Second is, I just want to point out the difference between developing a curriculum and the exercise that these states have done. What they've done is they've taken their curriculum and they've sort of, let's say, uh, pared it down. They've just pared it down to a level where the essential learning outcomes are not compromised. So there's a big difference. You're right. Developing a rigorous, comprehensive, good curriculum is a matter of 18 months, 24 months. But this exercise was different. They've taken their existing curriculum and they said, look, these learning outcomes are essential. Therefore, these kind of contents and exercises are essential. This stuff is not essential. Let's take it out.
Then why is it not being implemented? If they've done it,
I told you,
why is it
Karan,
not being implemented?
I told you, some of these states are implementing it.
Well, no, your first phraseology was actually to say at the best end were states who've done the thinking but not implemented it. You didn't say some were implementing it, but I'm happy to hear they are. But tell me something.
No, Karan. No. I told you that implementation is not 0 or 1. Right? So
okay. Tell me this. Yeah. Who pared down the curriculum? Was it in fact a body of academics who are fundamentally trained to take up this task?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean,
is it possible? I know you're not going to name the states that have done it because that would be invidious and you work with them and you can't endanger your relationship with them. But can you give me some sense of how many states out of the 28 states and 7 union territories have done this?
We don't work with all the states, so I won't know. I would be speaking from what I've heard.
Yeah, tell me.
But my guess would be that at least 6-7 states have done a reasonably good job, the first category that I was talking about, right? Another perhaps 7, 8, 9 states are in the middle. And the rest of them, maybe about 12, 13, 14 are, just saying things and not doing much.
That is a deeply depressing set of statistics, Dr. Behar. 6 out of 32 states and union territories. That is a very small number have actually done it. 7 are in the middle, which means they haven't done it. Being in the middle is no point. And 13 or 14, I'll use my language, not yours, are just flapping around and talking. Frankly, let's be honest, this is a level of irresponsibility because we're now talking about not just children and their education, we're talking about their futures.
So I love your phrase about the third category, and I completely agree with it, although I won't have used it. The second category, I won't look at them as harshly, right? My sense of the second category is that they will get there soon. Should they have got there 6 months ago? Yes, absolutely. But I think they're following the trend that's set by the other 6 or 7 states. So those 6, 7 states will get there. But the other ones, your phrase is very accurate.
But you know something, I'm just pointing it out. 6 out of 32 is under 20%. It's 18.75%. 18.75% of Indian states are in a position to handle perhaps the most critical educational crisis that has faced the country. It's a very
don't ask me the percentage of children those states handle.
But it's a very small percentage. 82% of Indian states, and I'm including union territories, are not in a position to handle the problem. I'm pretty close to 50%.
You're again missing the middle category. But
no, I'm counting the middle category. The middle category is not in a position to handle it properly. They may be better than the 13, 14, but they're not in an adequate position. Let's be honest. Let's not kid ourselves by being nice. I'm not naming states, but let's not kid ourselves by giving states a measure of latitude and cut them a measure of slack just because we don't want the situation to look bad. Think of it from the point of view of the kids and the parents. These kids are going to school and the system has not adequately responded to the crisis. That's the problem those kids face.
That is why this is the biggest crisis that the country is facing in education.
I'm going to ask you 2 more questions before I end. I don't hear our Prime Minister or the Education Minister talk about these issues. Frankly, I don't hear state level education ministers talk about these issues. Why? If this is the greatest crisis the country faces, and I agree with your description, why aren't our politicians talking about it? Why aren't they expressing concern? It's as if they're either unaware, or if they're aware, they don't care.
I don't know, Karan. I'm not a politician. I don't understand. I think this is the biggest crisis. They should all be talking about it. Not just they, the media. Why politicians? What's the media doing? So I mean,
You're right.
there are
You're
notable
right. This should
exceptions.
be a very big issue in the media, on television and in newspapers. So let me put it like this. Our country, whether it's central government ministers or state government ministers, whether it's television or whether it's newspapers or whether it's just commentators, all of us are letting down the generation of children whose future is at stake. We've either averted our eyes to the problem, or we're not even aware the problem exists. Or if we are aware the problem exists, we don't care. But whatever the outcome, we're letting those kids down.
Karan, in that categorization that all of us, I hope you're also including the upper middle class and the upper class.
I'm including the whole
upper
country.
middle class, because the upper middle class and the upper class is sitting pretty, because their kids have either gone to schools where somehow they have learned something, or they know that the schools have the kind of resources that they will compensate very quickly. So this crisis that we are talking about is just deepening and hardening inequities.
In fact,
this crisis has an unequal current. This crisis is a deeply unequal effect. So we should, leave media, leave politicians. Every one of us who's in the upper class, upper middle class, right? We must take cognizance. We must act.
Dr. Behar, let me put it like this. It's because you and me, our class of people, are not affected that this problem continues and isn't addressed. Had we been affected, had our children been the ones who were in danger of never getting educated or properly educated, we would have created a furor and forced the government, not just at the center, but all the states to act. It's because our class is not affected, and it's the poorer people who we anyway ignore, people who we anyway take for granted, that the problem exists. You're absolutely right. It's an unequal problem, and our lack of concern makes it a bigger problem.
I could not agree more. And, we're going down that path. That's a function of this basic matter, that we have a fundamentally unequal education system. Our kids go to different schools.
Absolutely.
And our public education system is ignored.
And it's also a function of the fact that governments, not just the present government, but historically governments have been happy for that to continue. In other countries, governments as a priority ensure that public funded education is not just as good as private education, but better. And that is what guarantees that whether you're poor or rich, you get a decent education. Here, our governments themselves have abdicated that responsibility. They haven't taken it up. But let's move to one last question, because I think I want to put this in a bigger perspective. This is not just the lives of a whole generation that are at stake, but this also affects our economy and our country's future. Because it's the young people of today not getting an education who in a few years ought to be the leaders of the future. And they will be the ones who will be responsible for the growth and development when their time comes. But if they don't have the education, then they can't fulfill that task. And if they can't fulfill that task, there's a big question mark about our country's future too. It's all linked, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely linked. At its core, if you have a generation, if you have 220 million kids, who perhaps can't do basic arithmetic, right? Or who have seemingly gone through the basic science and they don't know it when they're 25, 26, 28, 30, 35. What kind of a country are we talking about, right? We are weakening the very foundation of this country if we don't address this crisis. Absolutely the foundation of this country. And I want to go back to that, which is we're just deepening the inequities that we have, because as we discussed a few minutes before, this is an unequal crisis. So your and my kids, our class of kids, they will just continue to soar on the same trajectory that they were. And the disadvantaged, those in poverty, their life chances, their lives will be much worse off than they would have been otherwise. So that's the future that we are looking at.
Dr. Behar, I want to thank you for opening the eyes of the country and the audience of this program in particular to this huge crisis that is staring us in the face, and the fact that our response is clearly inadequate, and the fact that from what they say and do, it doesn't look as if our governments, in the plural, are even bothered. And this is a question mark that will soon hang over our future as a country. I thank you for opening our eyes. I do hope people listen and respond. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you.